afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our online workshop titled Assessing Your Urban Forestry Resources with iTree. My name is Elizabeth Lanham, and I am with the California Urban Forest Council. We have the exciting opportunity to partner with the local government commission hosting this timely online workshop thanks to funding provided by the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. This online workshop is the fourth and final in a series of online workshops that we rolled out this month in anticipation for the 2015 CAL FIRE Urban and Community Forestry Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund grants. Our goal with these online workshops is to provide meaningful information to local governments and disadvantaged communities in the San Joaquin Valley who are seeking to gain a better understanding of the available funding, the tools that are available to assist local governments with the preparations for the grants, and additional technical assistance and support that is available. Our dynamic team consists of staff from the California Urban Forest Council, the local government commission, including 3 talented members from the Civic Spark AmeriCorps program located in the San Joaquin Valley. You'll be hearing from one of our Civic Spark members shortly, but before we get started, I'd like to go over a few logistics. Next slide, please. So everyone will be muted except the person speaking. Due to the large number of participants, we ask that you type your questions and comments into the question box. We will be summarizing those questions during the Q&A portion following the presentations. Any questions we don't get to, we will ask the presenters to respond to after the online workshop, and we'll make the responses available on our website. Next slide, please. So we are excited to be joined by our speaker today, who will provide us with an in-depth overview of the iTree suite and what can be accomplished with the many tools available in the suite. We will also hear about how communities in the San Joaquin Valley can receive free technical assistance from members of our Civic Spark program. And finally, we will have time toward the end to answer your questions. So I'll provide a little background information on our guest speaker, then our Civic Spark member, Jennifer Alvarez, will speak, and then we can get started. So our speaker for today is Al Zelaya, and Al is an urban forester for the Davey Institute. His responsibilities include development, research, training, website administration, and providing technical support for domestic and international iTree projects. Zelaya has over 15 years of experience working in urban forestry, arboriculture, and natural areas management at the state, county, and local levels. Al is an ISA certified arborist and has a BA from DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois. Al also serves as a member of the instructor cadre for the Society of Municipal Arborists, which is SMA, Municipal Forestry Institute program. So next we'll be hearing from Jennifer Alvarez of our Civic Spark program. Jennifer?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our last webinar in our Urban Forest online conference. My name is Jennifer Alvarez, and I am a Civic Spark member. Next slide. Oh, no, this one's fine. Okay, for those who haven't heard of Civic Spark yet, Civic Spark is a program that was put together by the local government commission and AmeriCorps to help local government and agencies to increase their capacity to combat the environmental changes we are facing today. The program consists of 48 members, most of whom are recent graduates. They are located in 9 regions throughout California, serving an 11th-month term. I and my team members are located in Fresno, so here we can better serve the whole San Joaquin Valley. 3 of our 6 team members have been given the opportunity to work alongside California Urban Forest Council to promote CAL FIRE grants in disadvantaged communities in the San Joaquin Valley. Together, we hope to provide local government with technical assistance that will help strengthen applications and make them more competitive to continue to the next round in the application process. Ways in which we can help include participation in project planning, facilitating important partnerships, supplying useful urban forest resources, as well as review of application by successful grant awardee. If you wish to receive more information about Civic Spark or CAL FIRE grant application assistance, please feel free to contact Elizabeth, our project manager. Her information will be at the end of this webinar. Please enjoy the remainder of the webinar, and thank you again for attending. Have a great day.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. With that, I think we can turn it over to our speaker, Al.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next slide, please. So today my plan was to just provide you with an overview of some of the tools that you can consider for doing either ground-based assessments of your urban forests or aerial assessments. So there is a lot to cover in the iTree suite. There are about 9 different applications and utilities available, so we're going to try to parse that down and just focus on a couple key tools. And I'd also like to provide you with some implementation strategies too, so we'll try to integrate some of that into the conversation. Next, please. And for folks who aren't familiar with iTree, it has been around now for about 10 years. It was originally introduced in 2006. It is free public domain software developed by the U.S. Forest Service and the other organizations at the bottom of the screen. We all partner in providing the research, and we like to use the term taking research and putting it into the hands of users. So the foundation of these tools is based in science. We provide technical support for the tools, and they are very dynamic. They're continuously evolving, and we try to improve on them based on user feedback. So it's something that's accessible. A lot of communities use them, a lot of consultants use them, and we try to keep it free and accessible. Next slide, please. So just a basic premise, if you've ever seen an iTree foundation, you'll always hear somebody talk about structure, function, and value. And this is kind of the crux or the most important part to kind of consider how iTree differs from some traditional asset management or tree inventory tools. So you may have heard of tree inventories and conversations before, and that is really valuable information, going out and looking at trees, determining what species, condition, where they are in a relationship of your area of interest. But what we do is we use that information and then run that in models to then determine functional benefits, how much carbon is being sequestered, how much stormwater is being intercepted, what are the aesthetic values that those trees might be providing, what are the energy effects based on a tree's proximity to a home or a parcel, and then attaching monetary values based on economic models to those ecosystem services. But the key is really structure. So it all starts with understanding the structure. And as land managers or city foresters or volunteer groups or even homeowners, that's what we make our management decisions on, where we're going to place trees, the size of trees we're going to plant. So structure really is the key. Most people tend to focus on the dollar value, and that's what seems to grab the attention of decision makers, but it all starts with structure, and so that's what we have the most influence over. So it goes back to that element, and we'll kind of talk about that as we progress. Next slide, please. And most people think of urban forest assessments at the city scale, but it can occur at multiple scales. So one of the things that the Forest Service has advanced is an all lands approach. So many of these tools were originally developed for city foresters or doing citywide assessments. They have since been expanded really where you can look at things beyond the city or even at smaller scales. Next slide, please. And that is one of the most important things to remember, is that the urban forest occurs at multiple scales and in multiple areas. And one of the things that I try to remind folks is to look beyond those trees that they're managing. And so we, now have tools that can influence and help homeowners make decisions. So where you plant trees in relationship to your property could affect many different things, including energy effects. And so those are the types of things that we want to be able to reach all audiences when we're looking at urban forest assessment tools. And that'll be some of the strategy emphasis that I'll place today. Next slide, please. And these tools have been around for about 10 years now. So we have a good history, and we've seen many people do a very outstanding job in some cases at making a difference in their community. So we feel that having a grasp and understanding not just the structural component of the urban forest, but also how those trees are providing benefits and what that means to the community, that enables us to be more effective in many different areas. So if we could link trees to public health, we can link that to community sustainability, green infrastructure, climate adaptation, it makes our argument more compelling, and then we have a chance to have a seat at tables where we may not have been able to have trees considered in decision making in the past. Next slide, please. So these were the tools that I wanted to focus on today. I'd like to call these the core tools. So design, canopy, and landscape. Those are all online tools that run on a web browser. And then below we have Eco, Streets, and Hydro. Those require you to install software on a desktop, a little bit more sophisticated tools. We're trying to move more and more to tools that will run online because that makes things very much accessible. And so we, as technology enables us to do, and time and resources, we're trying to move more tools to that format. Next, please. Two of the tools are still in development right now. So iTree Landscape isn't available, but we anticipate doing a soft release of that in probably the next few weeks. So we'll probably put that out quietly and work with a few collaborators to start testing it, and then we'll make a broader announcement and make it widely available to the general public. Eco is undergoing some significant advances, and I'll spend probably a little bit more time talking about that tool than some of the other tools. And next slide, please. So as I go through these tools, I did want to mention iTree Hydro. This might be one tool I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time about on this one right here. It's a rather new tool that we have, and it's specifically designed to look at the effects of tree cover and impervious cover on stream flow and water quality. This is in essence a true modeling tool. It has some very sophisticated science behind it, and it uses top model hydrology modeling in the background, but it actually is a very accessible tool. So the designers, the developers of this tool wanted to make something that folks who are interested in managing urban forests could actually pull off the shelf and start doing some scenario modeling. So this is a tool, if you look in the lower left, it is really based on setting up an initial base case. So you can see there it shows a tree cover of 39% and then an alternate case. So here it's saying, well, what if we increase canopy by 42%? How will that then influence stream flow and water quality? Next slide, please. And it looks at multiple flows, so it's just not runoff. It's looking at base flow, pervious flow, and impervious flow. So it's looking at also the influences of how trees help infiltration and replenish groundwater. It doesn't attach monetary values, so it's more just a classic scenario modeling tool, more like a what-if type tool. But so consider this tool. You might be interested in tree planting and funding those projects, but perhaps there are other people in your community who could use this tool, which also might help you advance some of your tree initiatives. So now I'll start moving into some of the other tools which are more commonly used. Next slide, please. So now we'll look at the ground-based assessment tool. So iTree Streets is one of the flagship models that we've had since the beginning. Originally it was called iTree Stratum, and it is a tool that is mainly designed for looking at street trees. We changed the name somewhere about 5 years ago to Streets just to make it a little bit more intuitive. And this here will give you, it uses inventory information, and it will give you information on the structure. So some of those common elements, species composition, age distribution, species importance, which are the trees that are providing the most benefits for a community. And it will also provide you with some of that functional information, energy conservation, air pollution mitigation, stormwater interception, carbon sequestration, and carbon storage. This model also will provide an aesthetic value, which has to do based on a tree's ability to increase the resale value of a home. So it provides some of those monetary estimates. It has some functionality that allows you to track some of the management needs, and there's an optional pest detection module that you can use too. Next slide, please. And this is just a graphic showing some of the outputs briefly that you can receive from this. So you can see some of the effects of a study. This was in Wisconsin by the Wisconsin DNR, showing the values of stormwater interception, carbon, energy savings. And this isn't something that iTree produce. This is something that they produce and they use in multiple communities to promote some of the values that they were coming up with using iTree. Next slide. A couple key considerations if you are considering using streets. It's a regional model. It was actually developed in California by the Center of Urban Forest Research. So it's a rather easy to use tool. It's one of our most widely used tools, easily accessible. If folks have existing inventory data, it is not that hard to take that data and reformat that and bring it into iTree, and then you can take that structural information, which you may already have, and then find out what are some of the ecosystem services. Some of the limitations to consider for this tool is that it is a regional model. So you are, in essence, saying that my trees are similar to one of those reference cities, which are the white dots on the right side. Now, in California's case, you can see there are about 4 different reference cities in the state. So that makes the tool much more applicable than, say, for somebody in the green region in the north, where you are comparing your trees to Fort Collins, and in some cases it may or may not be very similar. So there's some limitations in the regional approach. The other limitation is that it is based on street tree modeling. So folks that are using this on campuses and parks, you are somewhat stretching the capabilities of the model to be really applicable to trees that aren't street trees. It has some data flexibility. Many people will use this for very basic tree inventories, but it is not really an asset management tool, so it doesn't track work history or generate work orders or things like that that are more complex. So we see this tool as being complementary to traditional tree inventory tools, even though it uses tree inventory data. A couple key items to consider is that this tool is not going to be upgraded as we move forward in the future with new developments. So it's still going to be around for a while as we develop ECO and make it more compatible to streets users. But it's one of the decisions that we had to make, where what is going to be our flagship tool for ground-based assessments, and that's going to be iTree ECO. Now, recognizing that we know that streets is a popular tool, we'll have a crosswalk developed, and so folks that have streets inventories or streets assessments will be able to bring their data into ECO in the future. So that's where things are moving. But streets is available today, widely popular, and it's a very easy tool to use. Next slide, please. One of the things I'll mention is there are many resources that we have online, and I have a number of videos, and my partner Jason Henning also has a number of videos. So if you have inventory available, you can watch these videos and they'll quickly walk you through the steps of how to bring that data into streets. I have some videos that are on YouTube I haven't brought into the website yet, where I'm trying to do a pretty much pilot scenario, so that'll be up probably by next week, and I'll have a real nice simple series which will kind of walk you through how to set up a streets project from cradle to grave. If you go to the mobile site on the itreetools.org website, we have a couple links where you can actually try out the data collection feature, which works on smartphones now too. So there are a number of different ways that you can get up and running with streets rather quickly. Next slide, please. So I mentioned ECO, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on ECO because this tool is much more dynamic and has been evolving quite rapidly over the past couple of years. And as I mentioned, this is one of the tools that we are expanding the capabilities of, and our goal is to try to make it very similar to streets, so that folks that are traditionally using streets will have a tool that will allow them to do some of the same capabilities, but we'll have a more updated model for those people to use. So again, this is a field-based assessment tool, so it requires measuring some tree data and inputting that into a desktop application. And it's one of the things where I mentioned with iTree Streets is that that is a regional model. We like to use the term local model with this one because you have the ability to specify an available weather station where it will then use hourly pollution and hourly weather to see how your forest resource interacts in that environment. Initially, this was a tool called U4, and it was developed for doing citywide assessments, and it has since been adapted for doing individual tree assessments or inventories, for the lack of a more common term. So people do use this tool for parks, campuses, and so forth now, and it's very adaptable to that, and we're expanding some of those capabilities. Next slide, please. And this looks similar in terms of what it assesses. So again, it's providing you with structural information, the leaf area, leaf biomass, tree condition, diameter distribution, and species importance. Similar to what Streets was providing, it also provides you with some of those similar functional ecosystem services. One of the things where it differs a little bit is this model now is using, you'll see, human health impacts. So this model is using a model that was developed by the EPA, it's called BenMap, to link the effects of pollution and how that impacts public health. So it'll provide you with some public health impact information based on pollutant concentration reduction. So if air quality is a concern for you, this tool will give you that type of output to show you, based on the tree's ability to lessen pollutant concentrations, how does that relate to less asthma incidents, less lost time at work, even less mortality. So it's just another way of linking trees and their ecosystem services to public health effects. And we're expanding some of these capabilities out in the future version, which we'll talk about. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit of a kind of a framework of how ECO works is you have to provide the field data. So that's something that you'll have to capture. And then it has a species database in the background that has information about a number of tree species, longevity, height at maturity, some of the characteristics of those species. And then there's a location database which has information about your city. What is the average growing season? What is the average date when leaves are out or when they fall off on trees? So it uses all this different information in the background. You select the site for hourly pollution and weather data, and so it's then using that information in the background of the model. You don't have to provide all that other information, just what's in green there, the field data. And it will then do a number of subroutines to provide you with those ecosystem service estimates. And we realize that much of this is very complex, and at the bottom there, we have all the documentation on these different methods that are used for this model, the research behind this. So we often will set people up with those if you want to know how they actually work, if you want to see calculations and so forth. We try to make it as transparent as possible, but a lot of that happens inside the code, so it's not something that we can just simply run off a number of equations and say, here, this is how you would replicate it on a spreadsheet. One of the things that is new with ECO is forecasts. So I'll talk a little bit about forecasts as we move forward, but initially that's what we're trying to do. Is a lot of people want to look at what is your urban forest doing today and what will it do in the future. And so we're integrating in a forecasting model in this next version. Next slide, please. And this just gives you an idea. This is from Providence, Rhode Island, from their executive summary, and it shows you some of the information in terms of an output that ECO will provide. So you can see the structural characteristics on the top, some of the environmental benefits, whether it's pollution removal, avoided runoff, and also some of the potential pest impacts for that city, showing that some of their tree resources in threat to Asian longhorn beetle and how that would impact that both in terms of the percentage and a dollar value. And this is something that they develop, the city of Providence, but they use the canned reports that are available in the models. Next slide. A couple of advances that'll be available to you soon is one of the things that we're doing is changing around the interface completely of ECO. So it will look very different for folks who have used it before. We're modeling it somewhat more similar to the way Windows works with drop-downs. So it'll have a user-friendly interface with integrated help. We're changing the data collection options. And another feature that I like about this too is in the past we only had 1 year of weather and pollution data, but you can see we now will have multiple years. And I think this will be important too, because you can see different variation in years. Perhaps it was a dry year or a wet year, or perhaps there are years where fires were more intense, and how does that influence pollution? So you can now change some of those variables and then see how the urban forest interacts. Next slide. And just to give you an idea, I mentioned that it is a local model, so when you put in a location, I think here I had Bakersfield, it will show you the available stations where you then can grab pollution and weather data from. And I believe there's at least about 24 stations that are available in the state of California. And there are some, most of these are airports, so there are some areas where you're going to find that you may not find something that's readily available, but usually you can find something that's reasonable to use. Next slide, please. A couple of the other highlights I mentioned is forecasting, and we'll take a little bit of a look at that. And we're expanding the report. So again, going back to making ECO more similar to streets and its capacity. So a lot of the reports that you see in streets, like the maintenance reports, some of the reports which I really like the diameter distribution reports, relative age distribution reports, those will be integrated into ECO also. So we're trying to make this tool, in terms of its capacity, very accessible for streets users so that we can kind of build them side by side, and at some point streets users will say, hey, this is a tool where I can do some more modeling with. I'm going to bring my data in here and we'll get some updated assessments with it. Next slide. One of the things that I mentioned with ECO, which has been a challenge for many folks, is the fact that it required a ton of data collection. So this was what I like to use the term classic ECO required. And this will still be available. And actually, we will encourage people to collect this information if they can, realizing that time and resources vary and expertise. But a lot of this information, ECO relies on functional leaf surface area. So you need information like crown height, crown light exposure, which affects some of the modeling in the background, and growth rates. So all these different variables fine-tune the model. In the future, next slide, you'll only need those two. So it'll be similar to streets. And in the background, the model will populate those other variables. So based on the species and the DBH, the model will then estimate what would be that tree height, what would be the canopy width, what would be the bole height. So it's not going to be as accurate as if you would provide all that data, but it makes it more accessible for many more people. And so we think in terms of having those options, it really is going to become probably our most flexible tool. Next slide. Couple considerations. Like streets, you can use this in inventory mode. So in the past, we really haven't had a good tool for doing assessments of parks, campuses, natural areas, golf courses. So we think that ECO is going to provide a whole lot more opportunities for folks who are interested in some of these areas beyond street trees, but it will also be adaptable for street trees too. And if you only have species, DBH, and condition, you'll still be able to use this tool. It can be used at a city scale too, and that's not practical to measure every tree. And so this uses random 1/10 acre plots distributed throughout a city. Next slide. So if you were doing a city-wide assessment, there is a function inside the tool, a Google plot generator, which will generate random plots throughout an area of interest. If you are interested in looking at a variation within a city, next slide, you can stratify the project. So you can then look at comparing plots, say, within different land uses, or you can do it aldermanic wards, neighborhoods, whatever might be your interest. And it doesn't have to be at a city scale. You could look at stratifying multiple parks, so you can actually have a comparison of different parks for a city too, using this type of scenario. So there are a number of different ways that it'll be highly flexible. Next slide. One of the things I did want to mention with ECO is that it will be using the same type of mobile data collection system. We're no longer going to be able to support the old PDA utility, which was a program that would load on some outdated software, Windows Mobile OS 5.0. Though there are still devices that run that, but going forward, the next version of ECO, we won't be supporting that. And again, if you want to try out data collection, I have a couple links available on the itreetools.org mobile site, and you can see what that would actually look like on a smartphone or tablet or even a desktop. Next slide. So one of the things I just wanted to briefly mention is it will have a forecasting element. And so this will be something new in ECO, and it'll allow you to project tree growth over time. It will also have some canned routines that you can use, or you can input different mortality rates. There's different storm events that you can model. You can also integrate inputs. How many trees are you planning on planting over time too? So there's a number of different ways that you can use the forecasting component for scenario modeling going forward. Next slide, please. And so it'll provide you with what that urban forest structure will look like here. This is a 30-year projection showing changes in tree cover. Next slide. And then also how that might influence some of the ecosystem services. Initially, we'll only have this set up for structure and pollution modeling. In the future, as we go forward, we'll have some of the other ecosystem services integrated in there. But what we can achieve in this next round of this year will just be those two elements. Next slide, please. So that's ECO. One other tool that I'd like to talk about is iTree Design, and this is somewhat of a combination. It uses technology from Streets and ECO, and this is really that tool that we needed something for homeowners, school groups. We had things for cities and nonprofits and consultants, but how can we engage private landowners? And this was the tool that was developed. So it uses a lot of the technology behind Streets and ECO in an online platform. And it also has a simplified version of forecasts in it too. It's web accessible, and again, that's what we're finding is that when we can make things easily accessible, folks will use it. Next slide, please. It will provide you some estimates on those same core ecosystem services. It uses a stormwater interception modeling from Streets, the energy effects modeling from ECO, so the size, the proximity, location up to a parcel matters in this tool. It'll also give you air quality improvement information and carbon storage and sequestration, and it provides monetary values. Next slide, please. And real quickly, just if you haven't used Design, it's one of the simplest tools to use. Next slide. You just input in an address. Next slide. Next slide. It then will bring you to that address. You trace in the parcel that you're interested. It has an interface to select trees that are common for your region. You place those trees. Next slide. It also has a crown growth modeler, which is just designed to give you an approximation of tree growth. So there's a large, medium, and small stature tree. And it's not meant to be highly accurate, but just to give you a reasonable idea of how tree growth might look over time. Next slide. And then it provides a simple output. So that's something that's easily achievable. You can share that with homeowners or school groups. It's a nice tool if you're interested in trying to engage new audiences about urban forest assessments. Next slide. And those are some of the examples of the outputs that you'll receive: energy, stormwater, carbon, air quality, and then it shows you total benefits for the year that you modeled. Next slide. And it will also show you projected benefits over a specified time that you put in. One of the other things that's nice about Design is if you see in the lower right, it'll say to date. So it'll back calculate too. So if you have mature trees, it'll show you how much benefits were accrued over time. So that's a nice feature that folks are using now for developing tree tags and other types of advocacy efforts. Next slide. So a couple strategies. Again, the importance, you may see a tool like iTree Streets or iTree Eco and say, this is a tool I need to assess my park or city streets. But being able to engage private landowners is incredibly compelling, I think, and it's of value. And it shows people, why the trees matter. If 80% of the urban forest occurs in private property, you can help folks make better decisions on their property, and that helps the community overall. So urban forests, think of it in total capacity. Next slide. And so we see it being used for complex projects where people are looking at, in the lower left, the trees and how they influence different schools in Atlanta, and just to making simple tree tags for Arbor Day or other events where people are trying to promote tree benefits. Next slide, please. We also see this being used for engaging campuses, whether it's corporate campuses. Many communities have sustainability efforts, and if you can get the business sector involved or other private property owners, just to show them that managing, planting trees actually contributes to community sustainability, it's something that can help your overall urban forest efforts. Next slide, please. Here's another example. Although we intended this to be a rather simple tool, since it has been expanded, and so there's quite a number of trees here. And this was a project that was done by Pennsylvania Horticultural Society and the Philadelphia Housing Authority to look at the impact of energy effects on tree planting. So those are all public housing complexes, and they wanted to try to maximize energy efficiency by tree planting, and they used design to see what those effects would be. Next slide. So again, if you know of other organizations in your community who could benefit by a tool like design, it may not be a tool that would be applicable to some of your immediate needs. Next slide. But like here's an example of Kern Tree Foundation or Tree Foundation of Kern, showing them that this tree is available to them, and that they can use this to integrate with some of their activities to promote their mission, which helps the communities that they're serving too. So again, it's just an idea, a strategy of taking urban forest assessment tools that may not be applicable for you, but how you can advance some of your initiatives. Next slide. And we do see a number of people integrating in or linking to design, and maybe it's a nonprofit. I've seen nurseries do this also. So again, it's just trying to find those folks that might have similar missions and objectives which might help you achieve your urban forestry goals. Next slide. So now let's go to aerial assessments. iTree Canopy is actually one of our most popular tools. So this is a tool, many people are interested in what is my canopy cover. And that has been something that we have often heard from folks. And with the advance of technology and the availability of Google Maps imagery, it allowed us to automate the whole process, which was something that has been done in the background in GIS for a number of years. So Canopy is another online tool, and it is designed to help you look at what are the canopy cover or other cover types of an area of interest. More recently, we added in some ecosystem service estimates, so it will provide you with some pollution removal information, carbon sequestration and storage based on the canopy cover that is estimated. So it's not going to be as accurate as doing a ground-based assessment, but if you don't have anything and you want to start with an assessment, Canopy is one of those tools that I highly recommend to people. It doesn't require a great deal of GIS expertise. You can see the screen that I have up there. You can actually define an area right in the application. This is the city of Bakersfield. I was able to find that online and just extract that from a DOT file using a free GIS software called QGIS. And that, I'm not a GIS expert by any stretch of the imagination, but it was rather simple for me to grab that and bring that into Canopy to do a quick assessment. So it's a very accessible tool, and oftentimes your city might even have these files or if you talk to coordinators, they might help you. And actually, now that I have the California DOT file, if you email me and you can't find a file for a city or place, I could probably get that to you also. Next slide, please. And so this is really just photo interpretation. So once you define that area of interest, it then will generate points inside that area of interest, and you can see there's a small yellow point on that lower tree, and you decide, next slide, what is that? Is it landing on canopy, or is it landing on any other cover types? And this one I just had tree and non-tree, so this is about as simple as you can make a survey. But you would decide what are the cover classes that you're interested in, and then just proceed through a survey. And I did about 50 points there. You can see up at the top there, it kind of gives you a running tally, and it says I had about 16%. It will also estimate a standard error, so it's statistical sampling over time, and so it's plus or minus 5. Generally, after about 500 points or so, you'll probably get it down to plus or minus 2, depending on the canopy cover. So within 3 hours, 4 hours, you can have a very statistically valid estimate of canopy cover, and that's a good start. So that's something that is, I would encourage you to do if you don't, and there's many ways that you can use that. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, this is our most popular tool, so it's being used by foresters, nonprofits, school groups, anybody that's interested in canopy goals and goal setting. It's a great tool, and then also folks who are interested in monitoring. Next slide, please. So a couple strategies to consider with canopy. One of the most beneficial information that you can have about your urban forest is baseline data. I talk to a lot of foresters, and they say, boy, I just feel like we're losing canopy cover. And well, feeling like you're losing canopy cover is one thing, but being able to quantify it is of way more value. So it's not that easy, it's very easy, I should say, just to use a tool like this to establish that baseline data. Monitoring over time is of incredible value. How are things like pests, disease, storms, out west, drought, those will all have influences over time, and also policy. If you're trying to do something where you're trying to mitigate some of those problems like losing trees because of drought, how are policies, are they effective? How is one community compared to another? So this is something, a tool like Canopy, if you don't have that type of information, it's worth a half day of your time just to try to at least start with that. And it could also be used for determining priority tree planting, so you could develop a class, potential tree planting, and then get an estimate of where you might plant trees in the future. One of the things with Canopy too is it can also be used with a tool called iTree Hydro, which we talked about earlier. So some of the cover types that you need in iTree Hydro, like impervious cover, tree cover, shrub cover, most people that use Hydro have to stop at Canopy first. Next slide, please. And comparing communities, to me, is of great value. So this is Australia, where they use Canopy to compare a number of their major cities, and part of a wider initiative called 2020 Vision. So it's, as I mentioned, it's used not only in the States, but it's used abroad by many different people. So there's a lot of different ways to apply the tool. Next slide. And just to give you a quick example, I mentioned that you can look at historical change, and here's an example of kind of a novel approach of using it to look at a stream buffer comparing 2006 to 2011, just to see how tree cover is changing in this stream. So what you're seeing there is a stream network. Next slide. And so there's just a 100-foot buffer, and you can see the two different points. This works with Google Earth imagery, which has historical imagery. So you can use Canopy in conjunction with Google Earth and basically do two side-by-side assessments to try to look at canopy change over time. And so you can see here, there's been a slight increase from 60% to 64%. Along that stream buffer, and then at the bottom you can see some of the resultant differences in the ecosystem services using that tool. So it's a nice tool if you want to look at change over time, but even just having that baseline data, it's a great place to start. So that's Canopy. So now I want to talk a little bit about landscape real quickly. Next slide, please. So iTree Landscape is our newest tool that will be coming out hopefully by the end of this month. And one of the questions that folks have is, where do I plant? And so we don't have a tool that really addresses that spatial question. So this tool, we are hoping, is going to help people with that decision-making process. And it's going to use tree cover maps and other data to spatially estimate some ecosystem services. And it's also going to integrate things like census data so that you can see how those interactions with Tree Canopy and people in communities may interact. Next slide, please. So one of the challenges with this tool was to try to make something that was very accessible. So again, this will be an online tool, and behind the tool there is some incredibly complex programming that goes along to make what it's using right now is NLCD imagery, which is free wall-to-wall imagery that's available across the US. And if folks are familiar with iTree View, so it's using some of the same imagery that you would need in View, but it's serving it up on the fly. Next slide, please. And the reason we're using NLCD imagery, even though that has a known underestimation of canopy, is that we don't have UTC data available for the whole country. So we wanted to have something available for the whole US. And we will be integrating in UTC imagery as that becomes available. I believe initially we'll have Baltimore and Syracuse, and as more and more becomes available, that will become available in this tool also. But what you're seeing there is NLCD imagery. And on the right here, this is California, and we are looking at US counties. You can see up in the upper right, you can look at things by census block groups. The programmers recently enabled places, so now you can look at things like cities, and below that you can see the different layers that are available where you can turn on the canopy, impervious, and land cover. You can change the base maps within here, so if you wanted to look at satellite imagery or Google imagery, Bing imagery, it will have that capability too. There's a blue ball where it says find location, so it really just has 5 steps that you progress through, and it's a really simple tool to use. Next slide, please. I'll just kind of show you what some of the screens look like real quickly. And so once you put in a location, I have places toggle on the right, and you can see that's Fresno and some of the surrounding communities, Clovis and some other communities that are around the area. You then select what are those areas you're interested in. Next slide, please. And that blue ball has progressed exploring the data. So then it will show you some of that information about the data available. Next slide, please. So you can see those cities, Clovis, Fresno, West Park, and so forth, and then some of the characteristics. So there's the area, there's the canopy and area, and the impervious cover based on the NLCD imagery for those areas we selected. Next slide. And so now we progress through to that middle ball where it's showing you the tree benefits. So you can see some of the benefits that it will provide you some estimations for: carbon storage, sequestration, and pollution. Next slide. And so those are the pollution estimates based on the canopy cover of those areas for those various communities. Next slide. And then it'll also provide you with some hydrology information. Next slide, please. One of the things that I mentioned is that this tool also has census data integrated, so you can look at that information too. So here I have the income. So if you were interested in looking at and comparing anything from poverty to home ownership, educational attainment, population characteristics, it does a great job of serving up census information. So even from that standpoint, this tool could be very valuable just to come in on an online platform and look at some of the census information of some of the communities in your area that you may be working with, or your own community for that matter. Next slide, please. We're also developing some priority planting scenarios that will be available here. So this is just, the red indicates the priority plantings based on one of the common scenarios that was embedded in here. Next slide. But you can fine tune that. This is looking at that same area but broken down by census blocks. So now the red area is more focused to some of those areas in the southwestern part where we were originally looking at. Next slide, please. So we're developing these scenarios, but they will be user defined too. So you have things like tree stocking level, tree cover per capita. You can change, you can see the lower one I have set up where you can see some of the other variables that you can look at. So if you were interested in social justice issues, you may want to look at the percent of populations who are below the poverty line or minority populations. So there's a number of different ways that you can change priority planting depending on what might be an objective for your community, or if you're trying to tie it in to things like a grant. So this will actually change depending on the criteria that you enter into this application. So this is one of the tools. It's in development. Again, it'll have NLCD data initially, and moving forward, it will be improved with UTC data as that becomes available. So I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock in some of the numbers that you're seeing right now in landscape and eco, just because I'm working with testing versions, so they're not finalized yet, but I did want to be able to kind of show you what's coming down the pipeline and should be available very soon. Next slide, please. So as I wrap up, I did want to mention that we went over a number of tools very fast, and if you go to our website, we're trying to move more and more to developing videos to help people with the tools. We have a ton of documentation on the tools too. So you can visit the website, you can get us at the helpline, you can call me or email me directly, and we can go in more depth on any of these tools. We're small enough now where we can provide really good customer service and help folks who are new to these tools to use them and to make a difference in their communities. Next slide, please. And so just a couple closing thoughts before I turn this back over to Shani that I do want to mention is that these apply whether you're a municipal forester, a nonprofit, a homeowner. I also advise folks to understand the tools that are available, but then to consider your resources and objectives to try to hone in on what might be the best strategy for you. Sometimes it may not be what you hope to achieve, but you can move towards that direction by using some of the more entry-level tools like Design and Canopy, or doing pilot projects. So that's something where if you're interested in doing something that's larger scale, doing a proof of concept at a smaller scale can be incredibly valuable to show people, decision makers, what type of potential you can achieve. And again, going back to moving beyond what might we consider traditional parks, streets that were publicly managed, and looking at an all lands approach. And so don't think just about the tools, the urban forest assessment tools that might help you, but how you might also connect other people who have similar missions and objectives with using some of the tools, whether it be hydro, whether it be design, that they can integrate into their programs. And I think that's where we're seeing many folks getting a lot of traction these days, where they're able to kind of look and bring more people in to help move these common objectives forward. And so that's, again, it's just trying to leverage those resources that sometimes are limited today and to move these common objectives forward. So next slide, please. And I just wanted to quickly thank the Local Governments Commission and also the California Urban Forest Council for inviting me, and also all of you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about iTree. And I'll turn this back over to Shani now.
Well, thank you, Al. We appreciate you taking the time to present for us. So next we're going to move on to our question and answer session, and that's going to be facilitated by Shani. So I'm going to turn it over to Shani.
Thanks, Elizabeth. My name is Shani Alford. I'm a project manager with the Local Government Commission, and I will be fielding your questions. And it looks like we have one, so if anyone else has any burning questions for Al or just some general questions, please go ahead and put that into the questions box that should be on your side panel. So our first question is, are there any plans to incorporate evaluation of ecosystem services from non-tree plants, i.e. shrubs, or LID strategies like stormwater planter boxes?
Well, ECO does consider shrubs, so that is one of the benefits of that tool. If you do a sample project, it does take consideration of shrubs. It's limited what it'll provide, structural information and pollution mitigation right now. In the background, we can do more with grasses, with pollution modeling, and also stormwater interception, but those still need to be integrated. So that's something that we're aware of too, and that is one of the things that is preventing us from engaging many more, say, natural areas managers that are looking at other vegetation. So that's something that we realize that people want that, and we'll be moving toward that. But right now, ECO has some capabilities. Also, iTree Hydro, that does consider shrub and the herbaceous layer, so that will have the influences in terms of the modeling, but it doesn't monetize anything or capture specific components, but that has a variable adjustment, so you can see differences in how you increase shrubs or herbaceous layer in hydro modeling.
Great, great. Well, it looks like that is our only question, and if anyone else after this online workshop concludes, if anyone has any questions afterwards, please feel free to send it over to myself or Elizabeth, and you'll see a slide here shortly with our information, and we can get those questions answered for you, or reach out directly to Al. So it looks like we have one more that popped up, Al. It says, from a Google Earth image, does iTree recognize the difference between trees and other landscape elements?
No, and that's important to emphasize. When you use that Google Earth application or the Google Maps application, that is you making that determination. So you are limited by the quality of those Google images. So it will generate points, but it's up to you to discern, is that point on canopy, is it on impervious, or is it on shrub or grass? And so that's one of the limitations of that tool, is that you have to be able to distinguish. And sometimes that can be difficult. Sometimes you'll see a shadow, and what I advise folks is to try to, sometimes you just don't know, so you have to aim for consistency as best you can. Some people will look at other imagery to try to make those determinations, but that is just one of the limitations of that. And Shani, there is one more thing. I didn't answer that second part of that first question about LID, and that is something that we are working with iTree Hydro, is to develop, say, procedures for folks who are interested in using it on smaller scale applications to look at green infrastructure applications. So that's something that is also in the pipeline of adapting that model, which is originally from watersheds, can do municipal scale, but now to be able to use it on more smaller scale LID type projects.
All right, thank you, Al. Appreciate that. And it looks like that's the last question that we have up for now, so that's going to conclude our Q&A, and I'm going to pass it back over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you again, Al, for taking time to speak today, and thank you all who tuned in today to learn more about this topic. We hope that you found the information useful. Please remember that all of our PowerPoints and a recording of the online workshop will be made available on our website in the next 1 to 2 days. The slide shows all the previous workshops that are already available online. They can be visited by copying down the links or by visiting past events on the LGC's website. The next slide has our contact information. If you have any questions or would like to hear more about our Civic Spark team, how our Civic Spark team can help you. And thank you everyone for joining us.